yes, feedback is extremely important. But one of my professors in INSEAD told me you don't need to open all the letters directed at you.
Dalia Feldheim, I am so happy to get to spend some time with you. I wish the audience could see the smile I'm looking at right now.
Spending time with a great friend. Looking forward.
Man, I mean, we can't get on a plane, but it's nice to get to do this. So,
You
and I
gave me
think
a
our
good background. I feel I'm there with you. I have my
wonderful.
coffee, so we're good to go.
God bless the green screen. So, absolutely. I think we're hitting summer here too. So you're in Singapore, and I think our temperatures are probably about the same at this point.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for doing this. And I think you and I met about, is it almost 7 years ago now? 6, 7 years? 6 years?
No, yeah, 2015, October. When I just left.
October 2015. Ah, okay.
Yeah.
5 years. It's
Yes.
been wonderful. So just to kick this off, who is Dalia?
Oh, wow. Who is Dalia? It's a good question. Well, I'm originally from Israel, and I guess that defines me in many different ways. The first thing is there's a word in Hebrew that doesn't exist in any other language, that is tachlis, which is cut to the chase.
Oh, I
and
like
cut
that
to
word.
the chase is about being respectful in being direct and open. So I guess the first thing is that openness has really been an important value for me. The second thing I would say is, well, this is connections that matter in Israel. I think there's something about the fact that the army service is compulsory for us that creates crazy comradeship. And for me, growing up, that's also always has been a defining factor. And then I was a competitive gymnast, and I guess that defined me in the way that I'm not as competitive externally, but I am very competitive internally, meaning it's always about just pushing you a little bit more to be, the best that you can be. And after that, I did, the army service, which I always say is my crash course in perseverance. And I guess I have this stamina and perseverance element with strong passion for relationships and connections. So in a nutshell, that's Dalia.
Now, were you born in Israel?
Yeah. I always laugh that my parents are British and my mom came over. I always laugh that I was made in England, born in Israel. But they came, literally, my mom came over pregnant. So, yes.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay. She hit the ground with little Dalia.
Yes.
Getting ready
I'm
to.
the first. And it's funny because being British, it's a very different culture. So I was the one, there's another word in Hebrew, or it's actually Yiddish, chutzpah. That
Chutzpah,
became
yes.
quite vernacular in the sense that, it's about being brave, cheeky, something in between. So I was the one that, the policeman gave us a ticket. They would send 5-year-old Dalia to go argue and get us out of that because...
How did you do?
I was pretty good.
Really?
I used to argue with the headmaster on uniform and get myself out of a lot of trouble just by kind of having this little dare to me. But it was a great balance having, British and Israeli culture. And I think it defined who I am today in the sense that, a polite way of going at things, but still being, direct. So when it comes to communication, I really believe the most polite way is a direct way. So direct yet caring.
Right. Direct is polite. Yes.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story.
Do.
My husband actually founded a huge high-tech company, the first Singapore Israeli company. And just a little bit so I started explaining a little bit about the Israeli culture and, from, Startup Nation and things like this, that conflict is actually a good thing in
Right.
Israel. It's a sign that we're moving forward and we're open and we're trying to kind of improve things. So they had their first meeting, and the Singaporeans are very quiet and, you know, don't step up. And the Israelis were all arguing with each other. And at some stage, the CTO stood up and they turned to the Singaporeans and said, "Stop being so polite. It's rude." So that has been me in kind of the Asia culture. You know, I love seeing, you know, combining, and I think the basis for this is candor, but very caring candor, and that's important.
When did you come to Singapore? When did you head to Singapore?
So I started in PNG in '98 back in Geneva. I was 5 years in Geneva, 3 years in Moscow, back to Geneva, and I moved to Singapore in 2010.
Okay. So is it the first Asian, you know, location that you've lived in, or?
Yes.
What was it like when you first kind of landed in the the warm island?
We call it home by now. I mean, we've been here now 10 years. There's a lot of things. I mean, we lived in Geneva for 10 years and then Singapore. And for us, Singapore was Geneva of the East. So very clean and organized, and things work well. And, you know, there's enough outdoor while it's still kind of very, very city-like. For us, it was really amazing, safe. I mean, at the age of 11, I had my kids already taking taxis around on their own and riding their bike. And so it was really kind of, from a life perspective, we absolutely love everything about Singapore. And from a work perspective, I think it was less about Singapore, more about kind of just the change of cultures, of moving from Procter & Gamble to another company, and just a little bit, you know, my experience there, and being exposed to things that are very different. So, you know, in Israel, hierarchy is completely flat. The best idea is,
right.
Like, the cleaning lady could have an idea and she would walk straight into the CEO and that's done.
And they'd fight a little bit, and then
they'll fight a little bit. Yes, exactly. Sir, you're wrong, but you know, in a respectful way. And that's, you know, there's so many stories about things coming out because there was this dynamic of sharing. And I think one thing that kind of a little bit was challenging at the beginning was a more hierarchical structure. Getting used to, you know, people not being as comfortable sharing, speaking up. But I think that's not, you know, for me, it was a little bit in the beginning, a ball in a China store, because I mean, with my direct, for me, it's respectful to be direct. Okay. And it can be seen as losing face in, you know, in Asia culture. So that was a little bit of a nice challenge, but it was more driven by, you know, the personalities that I was working with. But I think all in all, there's a lot of things going for Asia. It's really an exciting place to be. And, you know, I think as I came here and I started immersing more in kind of Eastern philosophy, I just love, you know, the combination of an understanding. I spent time in India, and I spent time in Bhutan, and I spent time, you know, studying a little bit Buddhism, and really there's a lot that links together with ancient Judaism, and just the combination of the Eastern and Western cultures I find really fascinating, you know.
No doubt.
More kind of, for example, the notion of compassion. I recently learned when we were in, you know, when I met with a Nepalese kind of ex-monk, that, you know, in Nepalese, there's one word for compassion called sewa. And it's the same for compassion to others as it is for compassion for self. And this idea that there's no fight between selfishness and, you know, and selflessness. It's really the idea that you have to be self-full. You need to be kind of caring of oneself in order to care for others.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some beautiful, beautiful notions of acceptance and, managing emotions without fighting them, letting them flow. So I just love, I love exploring. I'm very curious. I actually traveled here 25 years ago. I spent a whole
Oh,
6 months
you were
traveling.
like 4 years old. How could you possibly? What are you
Two and a
talking
half
about?
a year traveling the world, and that's when we fell in love with Asia. We
Mm.
spent in Indonesia, and it was really a fascinating time. I think there was one interesting story when I was in Indonesia. I had, how I'm a planner. Okay,
Hmm.
I like things kind of, but then I like shaking it all up as I get
Yeah,
there.
I was gonna say you.
You know
Yeah,
me.
you've
Where
got a
did
little
I
bit of
learn that?
both.
I'll tell you the story because I don't think I shared this with you before. So originally, I was just a planner, and we had this route kind of set up for us, and we were traveling from Java to Sulawesi on a boat, and it was so hot, so we ended up sleeping on the deck. And we met this Indonesian guy. He was our age. We were about 20. It was me and my husband, then boyfriend. And we started talking and everything, it went really well. And then he said, as we were arriving, he said, listen, my brother is going to have a wedding and it's a huge honor, if you would be
Uh-huh.
willing to come. And originally without thinking, I said, he said it's on the east. And I said, well, we weren't planning to come to the east of Sulawesi. We're going now north. And so we literally said goodbye. And
Yeah.
I walked like a few meters, and then I'm like hitting myself on my head. When will I ever have a chance to, be in a real Indonesian wedding? So we ran after him, and my God, that was an amazing experience. I laughed that there's more
Mm.
pictures of me than of the bride because we did this kind of parade from one house to the other, and everyone was like, "Oh, tourists, tourists!" But they were so, warm and friendly. We ended up
Hmm.
staying with them for a whole 3 months. But to your point, I was about to miss out on this amazing experience. And that's when I learned that, life, sends you the gifts all the time. And it's just a matter
Yeah.
of, are you paying attention to grab them?
Yeah. Are you
And I think
present?
that was
Yeah.
the big, that defined me a lot, in a meaningful way that, it defined my career. Every time I had a new opportunity, like the opportunity to move to Singapore, you
Hmm.
know, my boss, we just finished kind of moving into a new house, and my boss called me, you still want to move to Singapore? And I said, well, tomorrow. And
Wait
it
a
was
minute.
tomorrow.
Tomorrow? It was literally that fast. What are you
It
talking
was,
about?
well, I was joking. I was jokingly saying
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
I text him and I said, well, how tomorrow are we talking about? Husband,
Oh,
kids,
okay.
etc. And he said, don't get too excited. It's a huge role, but if you do get it, it's within 2 months. So literally we moved into a new house in Geneva that we were building for a long time. We got in, and within 3 months we moved to Singapore. But I guess it
Wow.
all started with this experience in Indonesia and realizing that life is pretty amazing. The issue is that we're not mindful enough and kind of jumping on these
Yeah.
opportunities. So that's
Absolutely.
where I became this crazy plan and pivot.
Well, you are on top of so many things and doing so many things. So yeah, I've learned a lot from you on that front.
Learn from
Going with
you.
it. Um, as you were talking about being present and taking things in, I had the joy of watching your TED Talk earlier today, actually,
Oh,
and I wanted to find the right time when I could be fully present to really take it in.
mm.
And I found that time and space, and at the end, you got a standing ovation. And I was wondering, the way I feel about you and how much I respect you and how much love I've got for you, I couldn't help but be just not only delighted for you, but wondering how it felt to be standing on the red dot and have all those people standing and cheering for you.
Well,
What in that moment, what was going on in your mind at that
I'll tell
moment?
you a funny story about that because, well, first of all, I mean, this was always a dream for me to speak in TED. And it started 2 years ago when I left my previous company. I gave a talk and I met a very kind of famous professor that became very meaningful in my life, Professor Tal Ben-Shahar from Harvard originally. And he snuck into my talk that I gave there, and he said, wow, you have a story. You need to go to TED. And he kind of planted it in my mind. And things kind of evolved, and I started working with him, and I actually started teaching in Singapore Management University, Science of Happiness. And I was teaching them about goal setting. And that was early, mid-August. And, I did the exercise with them. And I put down there that in the next year, I would like to talk on TED. And I shared it with them, just as an example of kind of putting the intention. And it's just amazing how life throws you things at the right time. And I think 3 weeks later, I got a notice from one of my friends in Israel that, they're opening applications for TED. And I was just in INSEAD, we have resident programs. So it was really hectic. They wanted a video from me. That morning, I got a video from someone that did something for me. So I just sent it out. And a month later, or 2 months later, I got the notice. It was only October that I got accepted. And, it was just, so the excitement started there. But for the moment itself, I'll show you, at some stage, I'm like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? Because it's speaking to 800 people, and you never know. I just watched again Brene Brown, and I have becoming Brene Brown one day, but she talks about how she gave her first TED, and how she said, okay, I was super vulnerable, but not many people will watch it, and how the numbers kept going up. So I had this kind of feeling last night as I was watching kind of just go up. It just went live yesterday. But the moment before, I guess there were two things. First, I have been practicing mindfulness for the last, I'm a yoga instructor, and that's another one of my Eastern passions. When I moved over here, I started practicing yoga, and then I believe the best way to learn is to teach. So I took a yoga course and then a mindfulness course. And that really helped me a lot, because I just kept on thinking, my peers were all very stressed, and we just, I said, let's just enjoy it. And we were dancing in the, preparation rooms, there's crazy pictures of us, But the moment before I went on stage, I went on stage just before Dan Ariely, who's one of the world famous psychologists, irrationality, amazing, and I was like, oh my God, what did I get into? And then I remembered the mindfulness, and there's a photographer that caught a picture of me just kind of meditating a second before I went on stage. So, and there's something about the process of TED. So I don't usually like to plan my speeches or over plan them, but TED kind of really, and I had huge fights with my TED coordinator in a good way, a great guy, Adam Max, and he was like, kept on cutting things. I'm like, no, that story is really important.
That's important.
Exactly. As you know, right?
Oh, yeah.
To talk for only 15 minutes was a challenge, but we did it so many times that when I was on stage, all I could see is row 3. And row 3 was, my husband went crazy and invited so many of our friends, and so many of our friends showed up. And we actually ended up having the whole 3rd row for our friends. So it was my parents and all my friends in Israel. And what happened is that they got all excited and they stood up, and the whole place stood up. And I was just standing there. And, I practiced gratitude, but this was a gratitude to a whole new level, because I just said, we had the light was slightly on, so I could see their faces. And I was talking to my daughter. I had my 10-year-old, 11-year-old daughter, and she was kind of, I have 2 daughters and a son. They're the reason I created this speech. So I was literally talking to her. I was talking to, it was just a really, I'll never forget that moment. Because after all the tension, I mean, I think I was shaking. If you look really closely, my legs were shaking the first 3 minutes. Luckily, my
Yeah.
voice wasn't. But after a while, I just looked them straight into the eye, and I didn't imagine them naked, but I did imagine them
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
as they sometimes say. I just imagined them there, and I was talking to them, and when I saw the faces in the audience, people I didn't know like really reacted. I ended up feeling like I had a very private conversation with them. So it was a
Yeah.
very special moment.
Well, it was wonderful. I enjoyed every moment of it. And for the audience, we'll put the link in the description of the podcast, and it's called Lead Like a Girl, right?
Yeah, dare to lead like a
Ah,
girl.
Dare. Oh, the Brene Brown link, right? Dare to
Yeah,
lead like a girl. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's really, really well done. So congratulations.
Thank you. I think it's been quite a journey in sharing. You talk about vulnerability, and I do share a challenging kind of story, but this is what makes us. And
Yeah.
when you and I met in 2015, I was
Mm,
debating leaving the corporate world and going full time into coaching. Remember
that's
that?
right. I do remember that. Yes.
I decided to take another role in corporate, and I guess that was, the challenging role there was actually the gift that I needed to
Yeah.
realize, to turn my pain into purpose, and to realize that my purpose is in the world of helping others find their purpose
Right.
and joy. So I guess that was the push that I needed to have.
Now, if you haven't watched the TED Talk, you wouldn't know this, but I really think that you should start your own line of tissue boxes with inspirational messages from Dalia. That's my
That was
product
also
suggestion.
one. That was also one that I was like, I don't want to be remembered as a tissue box lady.
Ah,
And there was also a whole dilemma in that, because the story is yes, it's about bringing your emotions to work, and
mm,
how my first boss basically told me, never be embarrassed for crying in the office. It's a sign of your passion. And if you ever work for someone that doesn't appreciate that, walk away. And that
mm,
sentence, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, got a lot of claps. And when I, this whole TED talk, I told you it started with the speech that I gave, but then I wrote an article for Women's Day last year in 2019, and I put it out there, and almost 60% of the comments were from men. And they were
mm,
just, I'm a husband and I'm a father, so I'm grateful for the message. But there were a lot of messages there that, I never knew how to deal with other people's tears. I
mm-hmm,
always felt embarrassed, and you gave me a great sentence. And
mm-hmm,
one guy was telling me how just the next day, this woman, one of his favorite employees, burst into tears, and he just told her, it's a sign of your passion. Don't be embarrassed. How can I help?
mm-hmm.
And she was just overjoyed. And he wrote to me that he had a toolkit, that he was always okay with emotions, but he just didn't know the right thing to say. And really, it's about, it's a mirror to our soul. It's an opportunity to understand that we're triggered by something. And
Absolutely.
manager, how can you understand what it is? And the end of the story, and I don't know,
Well, why don't you go ahead and tell the story, you know,
so it was,
again, so people know what we're talking about.
okay, so it was, the first month I was in P&G, and as I was saying, I was in my GM's office, and one of my launches hit a wall, and I was there, and I was super frustrated. Now, when I'm frustrated, I tear up. That's kind of my It's actually proven biologically. But anyway, I was sitting there, I was so frustrated, and I started tearing up, and I got so embarrassed, right? Because he's my GM 2 levels above, and I frantically trying to get back my composure. And
Yeah.
and then he says that, sentence, it's a sign of your passion, not a weakness. And I was just so empowered by that statement. And I guess, for the 17 years that I worked in P&G, I had many managers like Jim, my first manager. I mean, managers that it's a very nourishing culture. It really encourages you to bring your best you to work. I very early knew that my purpose was around, people and creativity, and I was able to bring my full self to work. I mean, I was marketing director, so I was able to do coaching. I became a junkie for training. You and I share that passion. So any training that P&G did, I went and delivered it. But also as a marketing director, I was able to work on campaigns that were about people empowerment. And one of them was the Always Like a Girl campaign that we did back in 2014. And the Like a Girl was really about reclaiming the phrase. So you ask, a young girl, what does it mean to run like a girl? And she says, well, it's run as fast as you can.
Right.
And then you ask them, when they're teenagers, and they start kind of seeing it more as an insult. So, our objective was to reclaim the phrase to mean, be proud to be who you are.
Absolutely,
And that campaign, it went crazy. I mean, it was 70 million views, and so many people that I talk about say, wow, I cried then, I cried today. It's such a strong campaign. And, of course, as a marketing director, I was very proud. But as a mom of 3, as I told you earlier, I came home, I showed it to my daughter, Mia, who was then 11. She cried. But the most meaningful moment, I think, was that basically almost a year ago, my youngest, Anna, who's now 11, she called me from school all excited, Mom, you won't believe it, but they're showing your ad in social studies.
Yeah.
So it really became kind of an icon of women empowerment. And I was very into women empowerment and purpose and living your full self. And, my career went from strength to strength, and I was really delivering the moon. But then it wasn't until I reached the lowest point of my career that I actually understood what my first boss was saying.
Right.
And that's when I decided to leave P&G. It was almost like a divorce because it's a long story, but the company wanted me back in Geneva, and my husband just opened his company. I decided to take a role as a chief marketing officer Asia for another company. The company is great, decent culture. The CEO was great. The global CMO was great. It seemed like the dream job. I was head of marketing. I had 100 people reporting to me. I was to completely redesign the marketing operations. But 2 months into the role, I got a new boss. And this is where the culture shock that we spoke about hit me big time. I mean, he couldn't have been more opposite than I was. He was a Six Sigma black belt expert. So it was all about, process and understanding the past. And he just applied the Six Sigma approach also to people.
Now, wait a minute. So you got this new boss, and did you have any input on, it sounds like you didn't even meet him before he came on. Did you have any input in his hire?
I was already there. I was already in the role.
Yeah,
I was
right.
hired by the global CMO and global CEO. And then 2 months into the role, he came in.
Yeah.
And now for me, I know, like, that culture is so important. And, so I couldn't have known that in advance. But, there were a lot of things, a lot of learnings. We can talk about that later, but I'll just finish the tissue box story.
Oh,
so
yeah. Sorry to
we
derail
don't
that.
derail on that. But yeah, I mean, so basically, I was all about people and passion, and he was all about process. He told me very early on, Dalia, I'm never going to share something good. I'm only going to focus on what you need to fix. And then, he said, oh, and I don't believe there's any art in marketing. It's only science. So you get the point, right? It was almost like a stab in my stomach. So, the two of us were like complete opposites. And there was something, it took me a while to figure out psychologically, the personality, but he was determined to have the upper hand. And, he was kind of very judgmental. So one day I was kind of summoned into his office. He did it quite often. I was in a meeting, boss wants to see you. Okay. And I'm a C-suite woman. I was actually the only woman in the team at the time. And so he sits me down and he starts kind of berating me. Now I'm C-suite. It's been 17 years. I'm holding it in, getting my composure. And then he starts really berating my team. And that's where I lost it, as we say. I became a lioness because, they were working so hard and it was just so frustrating. The lack of kind of respect and the lack of fairness that I started to tear up. And he smiled at me and he offered me a box of tissue. And for a moment, I had that warm, fuzzy feeling, remembering my first
Jim.
Yeah. And then I noticed something weird in his smile. Can't even explain, but I remember looking at his smile. It's almost evil. And he turned around the tissue box. And on the other side was a handmade sticker he prepared in advance that read, Dalia's tissue box. He was knowing that he will make me cry and, making this little joke. And I'm like, you kidding me? I mean, this is an HR assault.
Mockery, absolute mockery.
Oh, come on, Dalia. It's just boy banter. Don't be so sensitive. I know you have a sense of humor. I hate that word. Boy banter is bullying. Every time my son used to say, it's just boy banter. Dudes, that's bullying. But it took me a very long time. I mean, I came out of the room like shaken. And I did complain to HR and they went and they took it out. But this thing continued. I mean, it was a very challenging relationship. I have a lot of learnings for myself. It was almost like we were both seeking appreciation. Okay. And he was determined not to give me any appreciation. And I did everything that I can to get that appreciation. The first year I was kind of fighting, giving feedback. You will laugh at that, but we had, you know me, right? So this is where feisty Israeli side came in. But, I was there. We got some feedback as a leadership team that were too negative. So I volunteered I was very into positive psychology. So I volunteered with HR to have a program of positive psychology. And in the meeting, he said, well, thank you very much, Miss Kumbaya, but we won't be needing that. So that's when I
wow.
The reality was that for years, I knew my strengths were people and creativity and positivity and energy, right? And suddenly, not only were my strengths not appreciated, but they were really mocked. I mean, that's the piece. I just felt that, I'm not valued for what I can bring. And there was a constant desire to fix me. And, first year I was coming up with feedback and trying to change the environment. And, that's when I learned you can't change someone. You can't coach someone that doesn't want to be coached, right? So the second year, you and I did this scarf and all the kind of
coach training program,
right? So I said, okay, I'm an executive coach. There's probably a lesson for me. So why don't you shut up and listen? And I really practiced, right? Listening and, fixing everything that he felt needed fixing, So that year, my head was down. It was all process, analysis, scorecards, and I didn't have any energy left on focusing on what I loved. We did deliver great results, but it was kind of never enough. And at the end of that year, I actually felt sick. I felt sick. I was overweight. My hormones were completely imbalanced. Everything was like I was full of toxicity that I wasn't really aware of. You become a little bit like a frog in boiling water. But what woke me up, I guess, is I became sick and I realized that my body is screaming to me.
Yeah.
And two, I actually went to a P&G alumni that October 2018. And I literally remember walking into that room and suddenly I started crying because I
Mm.
realized this is the culture. And that was just a toxicity where everyone was so scared, not to do, there was my way or the highway, that I started believing maybe I have it completely wrong. And going to this P&G alumni just made me realize, no, this is a toxic culture. And that's when I decided I'm going to leave. But I didn't want to leave before, I found back my spark. And I said to myself, he wants science, and I was determined to bring back my heart and my arts back into the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
So I invested all my time in that. My people, I didn't want to leave before my team was taken care of. I had people follow me from P&G, and I wanted to make sure that everyone was kind of in good hands. So I invested all the time in building, and I had an amazing team. I mean, that was my joy in that
Mm-hmm.
time. I had a success, two people ready to take my role. So I felt like in that sense, we were ready. And then he wanted science, I wanted heart. And so we decided to create this campaign for washing machines. How can you create passion for washing machines? But it was a campaign called Fashion Care. You don't care about your washing machine, but you do care about your
About
favorite
the
clothes.
clothing. Yeah.
So it was all about your lucky shirt and all of that. So it was very, it was like a fashion show. It was very out there for a washing machine category. And it did end up winning a Effie, which is the
Mm-hmm.
award for business results and creativity. And that's when I realized, okay, I'm ready to move on.
I got past that now.
I guess it
Yeah.
was, no, it was almost a sense that I didn't want, and that's why I didn't leave from the beginning. I wanted to leave with my head held high. I
Right.
wanted to leave,
Right.
I didn't, it was really important, this notion of failure. Did you fail,
Mm-hmm.
in that role? And I just came to term that, yeah, I did fail in a few things there were a few skills and a few ways of management that I could have done better.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, I was, able to bring back myself. It's when I
Yeah.
stopped being afraid, if you like, and started focusing on my strengths that I was able to deliver. And that really was an important learning for me. And today, when I teach resilience, I mean, strength-based leadership is one of the most important, coping mechanisms
Mm-hmm.
for building resilience. Because I mean, if you're in an environment that constantly tries to change you, it's not neglecting your opportunity areas. It's about being aware of them, but spending most of your energy on your strengths, because it's your strengths that strengthen you
Right.
and give you that
Bit
energy
more energy. Yeah.
to deal with and to complement. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, process is something, as you know, I do it, but it's not where
Yeah.
my energy comes from. So I brought in a data scientist who was brilliant,
Right.
and
Right.
together we complemented each other. So
Yeah.
that's the notion. But I'm a big believer, and I interviewed several top leaders for my thesis in INSEAD, and I decided to investigate this whole area. And it's really about, being true to who you are,
Mm-hmm.
your values, and your strength in order to succeed.
Yeah.
So that's the tissue box story.
Like I said, you really need your own line of tissue boxes. I think you turn it into a not only a profitable positive. Um, I just, as you were talking, I was thinking about what if you had the tissue box, the second experience first. What if those had switched in the order in your life? Have you ever
It's,
thought about what that would have been like if it had happened the other
I
way
mean,
around?
there is data that shows that your success in the company is determined by your first boss. So I was very lucky to
Uh-huh.
very nourishing and supporting first boss and most of my bosses in my early years. I think that's why it's so critical, for companies to invest in leadership training, because your first boss, at every moment there's the next CEO in the company, and that person's first boss will determine, whether he will be successful or not. So, I think if that happened earlier on, I think it would have really changed, my approach to, on the one hand, it's, potentially there is an element of over positivity that I have, right? So it's kind of given me a reality shock. And I do believe wholeheartedly that this experience, I'm truly grateful for this experience, in the sense that it put just a mirror to what I don't want to do, and a mirror to really understand what I'm all about. So it's not that, I wish for challenges kind of early on, right? But I do recognize that you learn from these challenges. I just think that you need to have enough of a strong base of self-esteem and self-reliance to go through the challenges. And,
Yeah.
a growth mindset. I think what really helped me, Matt, is in those 3 years, I mean, A, I was doing all the mindfulness, but B, I had this coaching, and I kept on trying to get, as we say, out of the drama so we can enjoy the movie. I
Right.
know
Right.
I was caught up in all this emotion and drama and it's only when I only managed in the third year to step out of that drama and say, hey, wait, stop. Okay. That's that person. And, you can't make everyone like you. It's not going to happen. And I think that's a big one that I constantly try to win over his
not
appreciation.
only not only is it not going to happen, if you're living authentically, that's what's going to filter. There are people who are going to come up against your true self, and it's going to trigger something in them, and that's not going to work for them, because I mean, it's just, it comes with the package, and you're
Yeah.
one of the more authentic people I've ever met. So you know
And I guess it was playing with my mind, because he did appreciate my integrity. I mean, it was this weird relationship. I guess
yeah.
also for him, he was seeking validation. Um, and that was a big learning for me, in the sense that stop relying on external validation. And I know it's hard to say it to the younger people just starting out there. Yes, feedback is extremely important. But one of my professors in INSEAD told me, you don't need to open all the letters directed at you. So sometimes it's about
That's right.
knowing that, okay, that person has his perspective. Take what you think makes sense and take it in. And the how, or all the other mean things going on, just let it roll,
Yeah.
over you. Because it's not, I mean, in many of the cases, and you're the expert on feedback, it's not the what that was being said, it's just the how.
The
Because as
how.
I said,
Yeah.
I love candor, I
Yeah.
love, directness, but it needs to come from a position of care.
That's right.
And, my first boss was as tough with me. Okay. I used to call, he's the king of tough love. Okay. And I really love that phrase, because, it's really this, he told me things as it is. And, I grew a lot by hearing the tough feedback. But I always knew that he really cared about my development. And that's the huge difference.
That's
Uh,
it.
I, I don't believe in sugarcoating. Some managers, and, I was coaching brand managers, and like they don't like conflict, so they didn't want to share. I said, that's being unfair to your employees when you don't give them clarity. And you need to give them clarity. You see also now in the reality of COVID, you know, how important those leaders are.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know, this is
Yeah.
the situation. I don't
Even if
have
it's
all
bad
the
news.
access. Yeah,
Yeah. Even if it's
exactly.
bad, just be clear. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think
Hmm.
the importance of feedback with care, the importance of not relying on external validation, not letting, I mean, saying differently, not letting other people own your happiness.
Hmm.
That's a big, big deal for me because I became this victim. It took me 3 years even to say that word, okay, that I experienced bullying because it was so not congruent with who I am. You know,
Sure.
17 years I was leading the P&G Women's Network. I was dealing with harassment at work, etc. And you know, this is happening to me. It just
Yeah.
didn't fit. So I kept on saying, "Oh, I can coach myself out of it. You know, let me try this, let me try that." And it's just, you know, when after 3 years, when someone, you know, that saw what was going on was saying, "You need to write it down."
Hmm.
And I sat down one night and I just wrote everything down. I think I have 5 pages of kind of stories and experiences. And, you know, and when I woke up, you know, when the next day I shared it with my first boss, actually, who's my mentor and my husband. And he got so angry. You know, he's like, right, I'm ready to punch this guy. But, you know, he
Right.
told me, "Oh, yeah, this is bullying."
Right.
It's only when he was able to label that for me
Mm.
that I was able to say, shit, it is, you know,
Yeah.
and it's not, yeah, it's totally not acceptable. And I think that's my other, and that's kind of what propelled me to speak about it. And, you know, he left for early retirement. And originally I didn't want to share because it's not about, I don't want to bring him down in any way. Um, but I realized that it's a story that kind of needs to be told for so many women and
Hmm.
men out there
Yeah.
that accept, you know, bad behavior. And, you know, for me, it was maybe a matter of I tried to coach him from within. I tried to empathize even, okay,
Hmm.
with the
Hmm.
situation. And I learned two things. I learned, you know, there's Muhammad Ali's quote, what is it? Float like a butterfly, sting like.
Sting like a bee. Yeah. Fly. I think
And
it's fly like a butterfly. Yeah.
yeah, some say
Or
flies.
maybe it's float. Yeah.
No, it's
Now I'm
I-
questioning.
someone recently corrected me, so but it's this notion that I was trying to approach with empathy,
Ah.
you know, and to some extent, right, by giving feedback, by sharing, and we had this kind of, you know, love-hate relationship, if you like, that was kind of making things, but that prevented me from setting boundaries in a very clear way, in the
Hmm.
sense that, sorry, this behavior is not,
Unacceptable. Yeah.
and next time it happens again, I will have to complain to HR.
Yeah.
You know, it's until today. So I did complain. I told HR and I shared with, you know, I did complain. I did share feedback because that was, I'm always congruent. So I actually shared very open feedback, both with him directly and when I was asked. But I never, and I still until today don't understand why, I never submitted an ethic line complaint.
Mm.
Okay. And because I didn't, you know, until I realized that this was bullying. And I think that's another big message that I want anyone who's listening out there, because Matt, you know, you will be shocked how prevalent it is in the workplace.
Hmm.
I started studying it. I kind of, my head stood up. It's 1 in 4. One in
uh,
four employees feel, you know, experience office bullying,
yeah.
and Asia's numbers are even worse. And
Hmm.
it's a matter of, you know, sometimes we just accept behavior that we should not accept. And, you know, so my conclusion is, from a personal perspective, you can teach yourself to be happier and more resilient. Okay. And that's a meditation. So that's great. Go do that. But at the end of the day, that won't solve the issue. Okay. And you try and do the empathy and the conversation and then the understanding. And if you can change without, letting go of your values, of course, you need to adapt to the situation. But when that adaptation means changing you completely and is against your values, and when that kind of behavior is bullying, there's only one strategy, and that is zero tolerance.
Yeah.
And it's yourself and it's the company. And this is also to any HR people listening out there. My thesis, I was hoping to find that there's like an upward spiral that, people will help you and you can get out of the situation. And in some cases, maybe it happens, but the what is called perceived organizational support is paramount, because the role of the leader is so important. There's a whole load of research of the mirroring of leadership behavior. You have a tendency to mirror your leader, whether it's positive behavior or negative behavior. And what happened is just people start accepting and behaving to each other in a way that's totally not acceptable. So HR just really needs to
even situations where there's really egregious behavior, it may not even, you watch, we're seeing that right now with various police forces where you see something egregious happen and another, officer wants to step in, but the culture is, don't, and of course there are great cops out there, and but there are organizations that have cultures that are just, it's like good people. And if you're, it's easy to sit on the outside and say, well, I would have behaved differently. But when you're in the moment, in a culture, it is suffocating. And I don't know how anyone could genuinely know what they would do if they were completely dominated by a culture that said, no, that's, you're going to accept this. It's like,
and I had some, great peers in the organization that one of them, for example, came and told me, Dalia, choose your battles. Just don't answer, because you won't get your way there. And originally I was really mad with him because he was like non-confrontational, but it was a different way of getting their way. But many of them came to me afterwards, because I probably, it was harsh on everyone, but I probably got a little bit more of the heat. And many of them came to me and said, sorry, we didn't do more to protect you. But I don't blame them for a moment. It was just such a, and I interviewed, a few, and it's really that in such an environment, fear is such a strong emotion. And it's incredible to think that a successful leader, can elicit, can experience fear. It's just, I remember feeling the first year, I'm like, what is this emotion? Fear. Incredible. How can you be afraid? It's just, but it is true. And people just people just go into, one of the other kind of, there was I don't know, another colleague of mine said, I was just going into the meeting and just hoping that I won't be picked on, because in that moment, if I was asked 1 + 1, I would say 4, because you're just kind of in a state. And this is the biggest thing that people don't understand. It's not that it ruins the culture, the mental state. Even if you're a performance driven and that's, the core priority, you do not get out of your people what, a tenth of what they are able to do when they're operating out of fear. And you get it short term. My manager was actually, he had great business results the first 2 years. People were just, suddenly there was kind of a system in place. So, for upper management, he was performing.
It looked good, right?
It looked good, but, the team was burnt out. And it was, you just are, you're not able. I felt that I was just, yeah, maybe I performed, but it was 10% of what I could give the organization, because your
It's
brain
like
goes down.
operating with fear-based leadership. I mean, I think about like basically introducing a whole bunch of termites into your wooden house, and you can
Yeah,
make it look really beautiful, and it'll look beautiful for a while.
yeah,
And well, we did an addition, we remodeled the kitchen, but if you got termites in that house,
they will eat.
eventually, just give it enough time, that whole thing will come crashing down.
And
Always
it,
does.
and the whole organization kind of came crashing down. I mean, half of them
Yeah.
left.
Yeah.
So it's a, but what's amazing, and I think that's also important for companies, you can have a good culture and then have, the leader's role is so important that, one rotten apple kind of can take
Spoils
out a
the whole
whole
bunch.
subunit.
Mm, yeah.
So that's why it's really, I mean, my thesis ended up concluding the importance of these systems in being so ruthless in a positive way. If there's anything that comes out, it needs to be investigated and treated with. And I just want to say a word about Asia, because
Mm,
I think that's another thing. The writing was on the wall, but in Asia, people will not complain directly. And I had one manager that shared everything verbally, and the reaction was, okay, here is the complaint line, put in before she left.
yeah.
Uh, and she didn't want to put in an official complaint. And that's where, there is an element there that, you need to listen in between the lines. I
Right.
interviewed a person that works here. He's also Asian, but he was sharing with me that he worked with a bully boss, and he decided to create a petition,
Mm,
and people kept coming and complaining to him, and they would have all these bitching sessions in the, over lunch, etc. But when he came up with the idea of the petition, not one person agreed to sign
they
on it.
wouldn't put their name on it. Yep.
And I think that's, without being judgmental in any way, I mean, there's a lot of, and they said respect for the leader, he's still our leader, etc. And it's just a reality, that it's a cultural reality that, global companies operating in Asia need to be aware of. They just really need to be sensitive, to be reading between the lines,
Yeah.
and to be really looking at every hint of what's going on, and have more of the open conversations, because people won't share as openly as they
Yeah.
would in other regions. And I think that's also the dynamic that both we in Asia need to be braver to step up and put our limits, and zero tolerance, but also global companies operating in Asia just need to understand there's a whole harmony and respect for the leader, Confucius values, and so much going on here that you really need to listen between the
Hmm.
lines.
Yeah. Different kind of listening for a different culture. Yeah. So here we are. You are, when I think of the words that describe you from my vantage point, positivity, constant, growing always. You're just a ray of sunlight,
Thank
highly
you.
creative, intellectually on another planet.
Okay, I'm,
Lots of
you know,
those
that,
things. Yeah. And now
that,
you've come you've come through this amazing journey, and now here you are, you're entering kind of a new phase of your life and your career, and the family dynamics changing a little bit, and so where do you go from here? What's the next few years look like?
oh, yeah, it's really interesting because so when I decided to leave the company, I actually left without having another role. And for the first 6 months, I interviewed with other companies, great roles, great companies. And every time I got to the final stage with the CEO, I just felt I couldn't do it. I felt something was not right. And I actually had my last interview was with a global CMO, an amazing guy. we became very close friends. And I explained to him the whole dynamics. The family dynamics is that now my husband, after following me around for so many years, I was the lead career. He's a rock star. His company is doing really well, but the outcome is that he's on a plane basically every week during the week. My kids are about to leave the house in a couple of years. So I said to myself, and I was describing it with the CMO, I said, I love building teams, I love building brands, but I just feel like any role I'll be flying 50%, and it's not the reality that I want for my family. And I also have this deep calling. The experience just created this deep calling on kind of working with individual and companies and making sure that it doesn't happen, to them again. And he was like, you know what, Dalia, I believe you should not come to work for me. I am actually jealous of you. Go live the most amazing life. And I don't want to but him and I just got in touch a few months ago, and I may be doing work for him as a consultant. So
Wonderful.
things come full circle. But so when I had that discussion with him, I said, okay, I'm not going back to this very lucrative corporate world because I want to dedicate myself fully to my purpose, which is helping individuals and companies find purpose and joy at work. So I became completely immersed. I did my master's in organizational psychology and INSEAD. And as I told you, I met this happiness guru, Tal Ben Shachar, and I studied happiness facilitator course with him. And that led me to teach here in the university in SMU, which I was really passionate about because, teaching young managers and I've decided I want to go back into the lion den of corporate world and really work, holistic happiness. Because one of the big things that I've learned that, as I mentioned, don't let other people own your happiness. There's a lot that you can do on building your own happiness and resilience. So while, I work with HR on the systems and, the zero tolerance, more important for me is to work with kind of the leaders on better equipping themselves to be the leaders of the future. And the leaders of the future are braver, the leader of the future are more empathetic. And that's kind of where my talk comes, dare to lead like a girl is not for women. It's, we all have, and I'm not saying that women are better leaders than men, etc. I'm saying we all have both masculine and feminine energies and leadership traits. And it's time to move away from this archaic, old-fashioned hunter, warrior, industrial, where it's all about efficiency and productivity, etc. Because in today's world, everything is pivoting. Everything is up in the air. You need the creative people. You need the collaboration. You only can get that. You need the innovation. You cannot get innovation if you don't have empathy to understand, consumers' needs. So from all kind of aspects, empathy becomes a huge, I'm soft skill, but it's the skill of the future, empathy, resilience. So really kind of working with leaders to become, better equipped by being more, and that's why it's dare to lead like a girl. It's the courage, and it's linking into those kind of more feminine. Intuition is another one. We won't have all the information. Look at the pandemic, right? The kindergarten decided to lock down everything without having full information. We won't have full information, so it's about making decisions, and you won't have all this data analysis till the cows come home. You'll get some data, but you'll need to kind of apply your intuition. So that's where it comes, and and I'm really, really passionate because I speak with my young students, and they're like, oh, I'm going to be a corporate slave for a few years, and they know they're going to suffer. And I'm like, it shouldn't be this way.
It shouldn't be that way, right?
I loved everything about my corporate career, the first 17 years, every single bit of it. Companies that know to unleash, the passion, the creativity, the purpose, that care about their, employees as people, they will get so much out of the employees, not only, the satisfaction and there's so much, data around my students. I ask them, does success lead to happiness? And they're like, well, of course. In Singapore, there's a phrase called kiasu, which is about being more successful than the other person. It's very competitive. And if you are better than the other person, then you'll be happy. And it's completely not the case. No. It's actually the opposite that works.
That'll make you more unhappy.
Exactly, because you get to the milestone and then you want
the next enough.
It's never enough. The opposite relationship is true and proven. When you're happy, you're successful. So my focus now is on leaders and how can they be happy and what they're doing now. What are they passionate? And when I do, my favorite workshop is Find Your Why. I love Simon Sinek's work.
Yeah. Sure,
yeah. To the next level. And I love that workshop because, when people suddenly stop and think about their strength, and I always tell to them, finding your purpose is not about going to live in Nepal and doing meditation all the way, maybe for some, but it's really understanding in your current job, what are you passionate about? And, I was passionate 24/7 in P&G because I knew what I loved to do and I did it. And that's, the key thing I tell the young managers, do you know your strength? And are you bringing them to work every single day? And if you're not, you need to change something. So that's my passion now. What's next is a very good question. I'm passionate about this movement. Lead Like a Girl is one piece of it, but it's conscious capitalism. It's humans first. It's really this movement that the world, I hope, is coming to and realizing that we are in the midst of a major crisis, a major leadership. And I'm not talking political. I'm talking, I'm focusing in the workplace.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
All over the place, right? Research shows 87% of employees are unhappy.
Yep.
Okay. They believe they work in companies that don't appreciate them as human beings. 87%, that's insane. And it's costing the economy. I read one article, it was $7 trillion.
Yeah.
In disease, so I'm very much into this whole wellness at work, this whole mental well-being, because even in deep anxiety you can teach yourself be happier and more resilient. And I now spent the last 2 years learning some of these science-based coping mechanisms, and I'm passionate about working back in the lion's den. And if everyone just instills this whole upward spiral of positivity. It's just a matter of instilling a little bit of positivity. And,
what would the lion's den be if we took the lions out? Replace them with,
a beautiful den.
Kitty cats.
You need attention. It's all, and that's what I'm coming to say. It's not naive, okay? Yeah. The relationships and it's all about relationships that matter. I learned actually from Tal Ben Shachar, I'll share with you another word in Hebrew. When God created Eve, okay, the word that he used to describe her was Ezer Kenegdo, which in translation is help against him. Okay, so there's help, but against him.
Against him.
Relationships do need a little bit of tension. So it's not all lovey-dovey all the time. Tension is good. Yes. Don't be afraid of tension.
Absolutely.
Stop being so polite, it's rude, right?
You need to fight well.
Yeah.
In a relationship. If you don't fight, you will never get to your potential with that person or closer to it. I could not agree more.
And it's about understanding the other person's needs and fulfilling their needs while fulfilling your needs. So that's the important thing in relationship that matters. So, for me, I'm not all positivity and pink and unicorns and butterflies. It is about keeping it real, keeping it authentic. And keeping it real is about being open and transparent, but from a position of care.
Absolutely.
And that's the difference.
We have this resonates with me so much. I'd love to, even have another session talking about just the love deficit. I don't know why we can't talk about love in the workplace. I think that's, you didn't say it directly, but you talked all around it.
Yeah.
If I don't feel that you have a human love for me, you
Yeah.
know, not
Yeah.
obviously not the romantic sense, but just the human love of and appreciation of me as a human being, then yeah, it's hard for us to get where we could together to achieve. You're just not tapping the resources at all, like
I
you
think
said.
that I'm totally with you. I think the world is not ready for the word love yet. I love the work of Marianne Williamson, you
Mm-hmm.
know, to love and, everything that she represents. She had a quote of you know, the things that scare us the most are not the things that we're most inadequate. It's actually our strengths. And, sometimes we limit ourselves of bringing our best self, fear of
Right.
success.
Right.
And I butchered her quote a little bit, but I kept having that when stepping onto the
Yeah.
stage, that I kept on saying, who am I to, go on stage? And when you were asking me about that fear when I was meditating, I'm like, who am I not to share my message? The world, I'm not kind of helping the world by limiting my son, if you like. You
Mm.
mentioned the word son. I love that. I always had
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of fear of failure, but also a fear of success to some extent, because
Absolutely.
people will be jealous or whatever. And I think this is a notion of, someone told me, you're a sun, people can choose to sunbathe or to get
Or
burned, but it's up to them. You need to
yeah.
be the sun. And I think that, back to your point on love, is really, you know it's the core of everything. It's the human connections. So it's human. And that's the first thing. Human first movement is all about, human. Understand, as a leader, there was this research in Harvard Business Review recently, how many managers were actually asked, how are you feeling today?
Right.
But really asked it in a full intention.
Without
And
judgment, a real question. Yeah.
yeah, good question. Not I'm like, oh, I'm great. Really get
Yeah.
to know people as
Yeah.
people, understand their life, their desires,
Mm-hmm.
their strengths, their weaknesses, and help them, focus on their strengths so that they can bring their full self. So yes, I'm all for, let's bring love back into the workplace, man.
We need to redefine. I mean, that word, I just feel like it's been weakened. It's love is powerful. I mean, love is strong. Love is saying hard things to people, like you were talking about before. And we need to be able to do that in the workplace and outside of the workplace in order to build community and connection with people that allows us to see the humanity in others, even when we don't relate in some way, to find a way to relate and understand that our destinies are tied together.
Yeah,
That if I try and win at your expense, I'm only going to hurt myself and my community. You know, it
yeah.
may not seem like it in the beginning, but it will come back and it will make us all weaker, poorer, less prosperous.
It's
And
just the
I'm
whole
hoping that's what
notion
we get
of,
out of this.
when one win, we all win. And it's,
Yeah.
that's again this whole competitive world and the feeling that, the scarcity. Whereas this
Right.
collaboration and love and care, everyone, one of my first bosses, a woman, shared with me this notion of lift as you rise,
Mm-hmm.
which became such a strong mantra for me. Okay, lift others as you rise, because that's really the true meaning of love. I mean, when they succeed, you succeed, and when you're able to make people kind of stronger. So, I think that's something that we're also seeing today, that there's only, there's so much fear in the world, and everything that's happening politically is, how much do leaders build on fear versus, but there's, when you have fear, it's crippling. It drives you to do things that you wouldn't want to do. And there really is only one emotion in the world that is stronger than fear. That is the love.
Oh my
It
goodness.
Yeah, and we just,
Great
I
point.
feel like we're in such an important inflection point in the world that what we've been trying clearly isn't working. Okay.
Right.
It's work, engagement, corruption. It's really, we're on a train wreck. And there's this alternative movements kind of coming. And my husband is, really skeptical about anything that sounds woohoo. Okay. But he comes from the health perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. you know there's this whole conscious capitalism, purpose-led businesses, the great work by my ex-bosses Paul Polman and Jim Stengel. There's just these amazing movements coming in, and I just feel like, I asked once a person, why is all this negativity coming up now? And she said, when what was it, when an animal dies, the tail goes into hyper activity. So hopefully, and I sorry for this horrible analogy, but like this negativity, I hope that it's becoming so bad that people are realizing, and this COVID and going back home, and I know it hasn't been easy on many, many people, but there's still been a going back to basics. We don't
Mm-hmm.
need all this stuff. The best things are free. It's relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
You
Right.
know, it's relationships with ourselves. That's the compassion of others, has to come from yourself first. To say I love you, you need to be able to say I first. So it's all this notion that, self-love and love for other is something that I'm hoping. And me, I'm an extreme optimist. uh, that's why I decided to step up and start this movement of Lead Like a Girl, and join all these other movements that are out there to make a dent in the world, that we realize, sorry guys, it's not working.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's
And we
not.
have all this
Right.
research that is proven to us that when people have purpose, when they're physically well, gratitude, kindness, when you give to others, giving is getting, and the whole value of gratitude, it works. So we know an alternative to that works. And now it's, our role, and I feel my role, and that's where my training program comes on, kind of teaching it works and you can do it. It's very simple. It's
Yeah.
just changing your mind to be focusing on the positive, because when you focus on the positive, your brain sees more positive. And going back to the feedback, when my boss looks for negative, he will find negative. If I want to see negative in my husband, I will find tons of negative. But when I'm looking for positives, okay, I will see more positive. And it's the same for the world. And my Tal Ben Shahar, I love his quotes on the word appreciate and the double meaning of the word appreciate.
Absolutely.
We appreciate the good things in our life, the good in our life appreciates.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I hope we will have spent enough time not focusing on what we can't control, not focusing on what we don't have, but really focusing on what we can control and what we do have, and appreciating. And through that, when we become happier, we will become more successful and the world will become happier.
What a perfect way to wrap up our conversation today. I appreciate you very much, and I'm looking forward to the appreciation.
That was an amazing coffee session. Oh, my discussions with you, Matt, is always a pleasure. And we share
Yeah,
share the passion. So hopefully we can bring it to the world.
totally.